Hi, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. My name is Jenny Harris, and I'm one of the hosts for today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to give it a few more minutes, and we should get started right at 11. So we'll talk with you guys in just a moment. Hi, guys. For those of you who have joined or recently joined, again, my name is Jenny Harris. I'm one of the marketing managers here at AFMA Mortgage Services. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We will be covering VA 5/1 ARMs, a viable solution in a rising rate environment. I just want to let you guys know that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you would like to have a copy of today's recording, we will be sending it out after today's webinar. We will also be able to find it on our YouTube channel. So feel free to take notes, but this will be available to you after today as well. I did also want to make a note, we do have a little chat box and a Q&A as well. So if you guys have any questions as we're going through today's presentation, feel free to pop a question or a comment in that chat box. We'll probably save those questions till the end, but we do want to get to them and answer them. So feel free to pop them in throughout today's presentation. And with that, I just will kick us off with a little bit of history about, who AFMA Mortgage Services is. We call ourselves AMS for short. It's just a little bit easier to say, but AFMA, or AAFMAA, stands for the American Armed Forces Mutual Aid Association. AMS is part of AFMA, which is one of the longest standing not-for-profits member-owned association. And because we're part of AFMA, it allows us to offer lower rate and low cost mortgages to service members and veterans. Our commitment too is to make sure that service members and veterans and their families are well informed and taken care of throughout the whole mortgage process. That's partly why we want to offer these webinars to our members and prospective members. So thanks so much for joining today. And with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. So Rick Maines will be covering today's topic. He is our construction loans and training manager. He has been with the company for over 4 or 5 years. He's based out of North Carolina. And so with that, I will hand it over to Rick to get us started.
Thank you, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be covering this topic because, as everybody is probably aware, interest rates are on the rise, and that tends to be the climate that is conducive to adjustable rate mortgages, because adjustable rate mortgages are the answer to higher rates. Or at least a viable alternative to it. I want to start this with a poll, if it works as planned. Jenny, can you post the poll question? And just want to see how many out there think that ARM is a dirty word or a negative word. Your choices are yes, no, or not sure. So I'll give a minute for the answers to come in. Interesting. I did not expect that response. Almost everybody said no, which is good, because my concern was, after the crash in 2007. The media did a really good job of trying to make everybody think that adjustable rate mortgages were a really dangerous product. And in some cases, that's true. But for the most part, especially with the government arms, it's not. So today, I kind of wanted to go over information on an ARM and basically how to make an informed decision on whether or not it's a viable alternative. So today, what we're going to be going over is, the differences between fixed and adjustable rate mortgages, ARMs, how the components of the ARM work to determine the rates, how to determine if an ARM is right for you, and how to identify a dangerous ARM. Okay. So to start with, actually, before I get into the actual components of an ARM, I want to go through the differences between the fixed rate mortgage and the ARM. A fixed rate is the most common financing that is done with a mortgage. The rate is fixed for the entire term of the mortgage, never adjusts, and typically the most popular is 30-year fixed. And over the past decade, we've kind of been spoiled because the interest rates, for the most part, have been trending on a downward path. That, however, has changed, and right now, all the smart people think that rates are going to go up and continue to go up, and that brings us into the environment that I feel is going to be conducive. It's not quite there yet, but at some point, the market is going to start embracing adjustable rate mortgages as the alternative to the fixed. So the components of an ARM, basically, you have the start rate, which is the rate at which the loan begins, and it's fixed for a short period of time. And then after that fixed rate period ends, the rate adjusts. You have the index, which is a benchmark interest rate that reflects the current market conditions. It's typically a very slow-moving index. It's a slow-moving rate, and it's used to determine the new ARM rate. The indexes can also be found online, New York Times. They're designed to be things that the consumer can find easily. The margin is the fixed percentage that is added to the index to determine the new rate for the next period. Now, rate caps are what limits the volatility, limits the rate shock on the interest rate change. Look back date is the date that is set prior to the actual date that the rate adjusts, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail later. And then finally, the rounding factor, which is something that kind of flies below the radar, people don't pay attention to, but as you'll see in later slides, it is very important to determining the quality of the ARM. Okay, next. All right, so start rate. On a 30-year fixed, the rate is fixed for the entire term of the loan, but with an adjustable rate mortgage, the rate starts low and then is fixed for a short period of time. And then after that period ends, it adjusts according to the term of the loan. Sometimes it's also accompanied by a teaser rate or an introductory rate, which is an even lower rate offered as an added benefit of applying for the ARM. So for example, the start rate is fixed at 3% for years 1 through 5, but for the first 6 months, the interest rate is 2.5%. And I think an analogy on that would be it's very similar to when you get an offer in the mail for a balance transfer on your credit card. The introductory rate is 0% for the first 12 months, and then after that it adjusts to the 20% or 25% rate that a credit card has. Now, on intermediate or hybrid ARMs, which is what this seminar is about, the start rates are typically 3, 5, 7, or 10 years. And obviously, the longer the fixed rate term, the less volatile the loan is itself. Okay. Now, the index, as I said before, is the benchmark interest rate that reflects the current market conditions. And it's used to determine the new rate when the ARM adjusts. Now, you'll see in front of you a list of the common ARM indices. When I actually got into the industry 20 years ago, pretty much everything was tied to the one-year Treasury bills. And that's not even listed on here anymore. After that, everybody changed to the LIBOR, which is the London Interbank Offering Rate Index, LIBOR, and all of the terms and acronyms in the parentheses are what you will commonly hear on the street or see published. Okay. Of late, though, a lot of the adjustable rate mortgages are tied to the secured overnight financing rate, which is the last index on that list. Commonly referred to as SOFR. And then you also above that, the bank prime loan, prime rate. That's what you hear advertised on TV or on the radio. The Fed is meeting and they've adjusted or they've increased the prime rate by 0.25%. Most of the time, your credit cards and your home equity lines of credit tend to be tied to the prime rate. Okay, next. All right, margin. It's a fixed percentage that is added to the index to determine the new rate for the next period. Lower the margin, the better the loan for the consumer. The higher the margin, the better the loan for the lender. Basically, another way of looking at the margin is the profit margin for the lender. And they do vary. Actually, when pricing comes out on government arms, there are typically pricing associated with a 1.75% margin, a 2% margin, and a 2.25% margin. So typically, the lower the margin, the more expensive it is for the borrower to get that margin, since the margin favors the borrower. But that always doesn't hold suit. Now, this chart indicates the effect of the margin. And I mean, it's a pretty simple concept. The difference between a margin of 1.75% and 2.75% is 1%, and that tends to carry throughout the life of the arm. And one thing I will point out is the 2.75% margin, that tends to be tied to the conventional adjustable rate mortgages, whereas the government loans or government arms tend to have the smaller margins and thus are safer for the consumers. Next. Rate caps and floors. So caps, as I said before, caps limit the volatility of the loan. It limits how much the interest rate can increase or decrease during a certain time frame. And I do want to point out, adjustable rate mortgages do decrease. And in fact, since the crash, those people who had adjustable rate mortgages, even though the fear was they were going to cause the system to collapse, they actually outperformed those people who had 30-year fixed rates, because those people who had 30-year fixed rates had to actually refinance to take advantage of the lower rate environment. Whereas those people who had adjustable rate mortgages, their rates adjusted with the market. Now, you'll see that it's typically expressed in three terms. And you'll see here on the left, it's 1/1/5 or 5/2/5. The first number is how much the rate can adjust at the first adjustment. So the first arm, the 1/1/5, that can only adjust up or down 1% after, say, the 5 years, okay? The second one, that can adjust up or down 5% in the first adjustment. So after 5 years, if you started at 4%, that could actually go up to 9% in that very first adjustment. So obviously, the higher that first number is, the more volatile the loan. The second number is the amount the rate can adjust up or down during that adjustment period. So if it's fixed for 5 years and then it adjusts every 1 year after that, or every 6 months after that, then the first one can only go up or down 1%. The second one can only go up or down 2%. And the final one is the lifetime cap. So in both cases, and this is typical, the lifetime cap is either 5 or 6%. So like that second one, it could adjust up to the lifetime cap, that very first adjustment, but it could never go higher than that, okay? Now the floors determine how low the interest rate can decrease during the life of the loan. A lot of people automatically assume that the floor is going to be 0, but in reality, if the index were to go to 0, you would still add the margin to the index to determine the new rate. So typically the floor is equal to the index. So if you have a 1.75%, I'm sorry, not index, margin. If you have a 1.75% margin, then the floor would be 1.75%. Okay? And then look back date and rounding. So the look back date is the date that's used to calculate the new rate. It's not the actual date that the rate changes, because the lender needs time to meet the disclosure timelines, the compliance requirements. So it's usually 45 or 60 days prior to the date that the rate actually adjusts. And I actually remember the very first house that I purchased with a 1-year adjustable rate mortgage that started at 7%, and I thought I was getting a deal because at the time the 30-year fixed was 9%. And then I distinctly remember 45 days prior to that adjustment, I went into the paper, New York Times, and I looked to see what my index was, so I knew what my rate was going to adjust to before the lender told me. Okay, rounding. Rounding, the mortgage rates are almost always based in increments of 1/8%. And what rounding does is it allows the new calculation to be expressed in what we typically deal with in the lending world. So instead of 3.067%, it would adjust to either 3% or 3.125%, 3 1/8. And there are 3 choices. It can be rounded up, rounded down, or rounded to the nearest 1/8. This is something that almost nobody really pays attention to, but it's actually important, because if the calculation is 3.0001 and your loan rounds to the nearest eighth, then it's going to adjust to 3%, and then that's going to impact things on down the line. Whereas if it's rounded up to the nearest eighth, then even though it's just a hair over 3%, your new rate's going to be 3.125. Okay, next. So the following chart kind of puts it all together and kind of projects out 2 5/1 arms that are both fixed at 3% for the first 5 years. So on the first one, your margin is 2%. The caps are 115, and the rate is 3%. In the second one, the margin is 2.75. The caps are 6, 2, and 6. And again, start rate's 3%. So let's see what happens in the first year of the adjustment, which is year 6. So the index has gone to 4.275%. Now, we add the margin 2% to that, and you would get 6.275%. So if you didn't have any rate caps, your new rate would be 6.27%. Okay, that rate would be 4%. Let's see, 4. Yeah, that would be 4% because it is impacted by the first rate cap, the 1%. Whereas the second loan, that can actually go all the way up. That one's 2.75% on the margin, so that can actually go all the way up to 7.02%. But that one is rounded up. And the second one is rounded up. The first one is rounded to the nearest. Okay. So that's why the discrepancy between the first one and the second one. Okay, so now we go to year 7, and the index is 5.51%. So that one would adjust to 7.51%, but the most that it can adjust in any one adjustment is 1%, so that one goes to 5%, whereas the second one actually goes to 8.375%. Again, the rounding up impacts that one, okay? And so the 8% or the 8th year goes to 6 and 8.75 respectively. All right, and then I'm going to jump ahead to year 10. And in year 10, that's the first time that the lifetime cap actually comes into play. So the first one, the rate can never go any higher than 5% above the initial start rate. So that one adjusts to 8%. And the second one has a 6% lifetime cap, so that one actually can adjust to 9%. All right. So even though that second one would have been 9.75%, it's limited by the lifetime cap. All right, now after year 10, the market has changed, and instead of trending up, the indexes are going down. So in year 11, the first one should actually be 7.01%, but that's rounded down to 7%, which actually fits within the 1-year adjustment. So the new rate 7%. But since the second one can go up or down 2%, it can actually decrease more than 1%, and it decreases to 7.875%. Right, then year 12, again, you know, this time the caps really don't come into play, but the rounding does, because it rounds down to the 6.25%. The second one rounds up to the 7.125%. Okay, so I know that's a lot of detailed math, but the general point is, if you look at the average rate over 15 years, even though both of those started with 3% and they're both based on the same index, the second one, you have an average full percent higher over 15 years than the first one. Okay, and that is why government arms tend to be a little safer than the conventional arms. All right, go to the next one. Oh, you know, there's actually one more thing I'm going to point out. When the arm adjusts, the new payment is based on the actual loan balance at the time. So if you end up putting, you know, $40,000 or $50,000 towards the loan balance, that new payment is based on that new loan balance. So in a roundabout way, it's kind of a free refinance, you know, although sometimes it's a refinance to a higher rate, but, you know, in a lowering rate environment, it is a way to take advantage of that little feature that nobody really knows about, but it's always there. Okay, sorry, next. So how do I know which one to choose, the 30-year fixed or the VA 5/1 arm? Well, the answer to that is really depends on how long you intend to be in the loan. And I say loan instead of property because the average time that Americans are in a loan, when you factor in selling the property and refinancing, tends to be 5 to 7 years. Okay. So what this chart does is it compares a worst case scenario with a VA 5/1 arm to what the performance would be on a fixed rate mortgage. So in the ARM situation, or in the ARM scenario, the rate is 4% upfront. And then for the first 5 years, it stays at 4%. Now, obviously, the 30-year fix stays at 5% the entire time. Down at the bottom, you see a running average after each year. So after year 1, the ARM average is 4%, 4%, 4%. Then you get up to year 6. The worst case scenario is that rate's going to adjust to 5%. But if you're in that loan or in that property for 6 years, your average rate is not going to be any more than 4.175, which is almost 0.75% better than the fixed. Year 7, worst case scenario, it goes up to 6%, but over 7 years, it's more than 0.5% better than the 30-year fixed. And then year 8, it can go up to 7%. That's when it starts to get a little bit more iffy. Now, in this particular example, the difference between a 30-year fixed and the ARM is a full 1%. If it's any more than 0.5% different, and you're going to be there for be in the loan for 6 to 7 years, you probably want to go with the ARM versus the fixed, because the fixed only comes into play when you're in there long term. If it's less than 0.5%, then it starts to favor more the 30-year fixed, okay? Or if you're going to be in there longer than the 6-7 years. All right, next. So finally, how do we identify a dangerous ARM? Most important thing is to not focus on the published rate. This is one case where you definitely want to read the fine print, okay? Beware of the short fixed rate periods, 3 years or less, because the shorter the fixed rate, the more you are subject to the market. Now, just because you're subject to the market, that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, because over time, you're just going to adjust with the market. But in a trending upward market, which we tend to be in, that's where you would want to focus. Also, make sure you identify the index being used and look up a chart showing how the index moves over time. They all tend to move slowly over time, but for example, the LIBOR might be at 1%, whereas the prime would be at 3.5%. Prime's 3.5 today. So there is a difference in the actual index. So before you actually commit to the loan, take the time to look up the index and compare it to the other indexes that are used. Margin, again, obviously the lower the better. The lower the better for the consumer, the higher the better for the lender. Rate caps. Pay particular attention to the first adjustment and the amount that it can adjust yearly thereafter. And then rounding, I spent a good bit of time on that. While it doesn't seem like much, having an ARM that rounds to the nearest 8 is better than up to the nearest 8. That little word up could cost you thousands of dollars over the life of the loan. All right, now, questions. I have some.
I think we have a few coming in. I'm not
Okay.
sure if you can see them on your side or not, Rick, but.
Okay. All right, so I'm sorry, but you've lost me. I can't understand. All right, well, yes, unfortunately, ARMs tend to be confusing. But let's see, 33%. Okay, so if your current interest rate right now is at 3%, then you don't want to do anything. You want to just stay with that, because the average 30-year fixed right now is in the 5s, and the ARMs right now have not become a viable alternative. The reason I wanted to do this this seminar was in anticipation of these coming to the forefront, so that people could go into it with eyes wide open. Okay. And any other questions? Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, then I will go ahead and bid you all a, oh, wait a minute. Let's see, we might have one more that came in. Okay, so you all have a great day. Thank you for taking time out to join the seminar. And Jenny, can you let everybody know how they can access the recorded version?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining today and for your questions. We really appreciate it. There will be a follow-up email that I will send out, which will have a link to today's training. It'll also include Rick's contact information. So if you have any additional questions, you can get in touch with him. But thank you so much, Rick, for your time as well. We really appreciate you doing this training for us. And to everyone out there, to our members, we really appreciate you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.